coming to you from the unassuming city of board gaming, Omaha, Nebraska. Welcome to the Out of the Dust podcast. I'm your host, humble Bryce, and tied in with a popular occurring Out of the Dust geek list on Board Game Geek. The Out of the Dust podcast is a bi-weekly podcast that is focused on re-exploring games we played that we hadn't previously played in a year or more. Why did the game get dusty? Why did you decide to dust it off? How does the game compare to how you remembered it? Are you likely to play it more often in the future? These are the questions that we're interested in examining on Out of the Dust. This week on the podcast, episode 74, on the Out of the Dust segment, I'll bring Kachina out of the dust, and a contributor will dust off both the World Series of Yahtzee and Trumpet. On the reaction segment, I enjoy the horde of new games that have been being released lately. On the What I've Been Playing segment, I review Mariposas. On the Obscure Bryce Game segment, I review Age of Towers, and we wrap up the episode by concluding my review of the BGG and my own top 5 countdown of 2010 with the number ones on the list. I had a chance to bring Kachina, a 2009 tile-laying game from designer Scott Caputo of Whistle Stop fame and publisher Bucephalus Games, out of the dust recently. This one was very dusty for me. I last played it 7 years, 2 months, and 4 days ago when I first acquired it, and tried it out upon receiving it in the mail. I remember thinking then that it was merely okay, but the theme and attractive art has kept it in my collection all these years, despite it not making it to the table again since then. My kids are studying Hopi legends just for fun as part of homeschool, which reminded me about this game. It's a fairly straightforward tile-laying game, so I thought it would be a good one to play with the kids during game school time, which is a selfish invention of mine, just to get more games to the table. This play with my kids went really well, which leads me to think it's probably dramatically more interesting at the full player count of 4 than the player count of 2 that I originally played it at. This game is helped by its vivid art, but the tile abilities are genuinely interesting and create some fascinating decisions during the course of a game. It's always fun to re-explore older obscure games like this one, and I'm glad to have gotten it to the table again. Let's see what a contributor brought out of the dust. Ben Lott, username Blot, brought a couple of older titles out of the dust recently. First was the World Series of Yahtzee, a mass-market real-time Yahtzee spin-off released by publisher Hasbro in 2012. Ben last played it 6 years, 6 months, and 1 day ago. He writes, "Another game that was going to leave in the garage sale, and I pulled it off the table to play once. It's not great, but we don't have many speed-rolling dice games anymore, so I kept it for some super casual play. Plus I really like the dice. Not sure how often it will be played, though." Ben also brought Trumpet out of the dust, the 1990 game from publisher Amigo, designer Phil Urbanus Sr., a very interesting designer with quite the eclectic collection of titles to his credit, including Clue the card game and Monopoly Mega Edition. Ben last played Trumpet 6 years, 1 month, and 26 days ago. He writes, "After going through the entire game closet for the garage sale, it brought more games to the forefront than I had forgotten about. This trick-taking game with the board felt like it could be fun to revisit. Dusting it off actually made me think it could have gone in the sale. We have enough trick-taking games that are better, and this one doesn't do much to impress." Thanks for the contribution, Ben. You had quite the list of out-of-the-dust games this month, but these two in particular jumped out at me because I could totally see myself giving them a spin sometime, or picking them up at a thrift store if I saw either on the shelf. Reaction segment time! This episode I'm going to talk about the huge influx of games that have been hitting the market recently. I remember when both Gen Con and Essen were cancelled and many people speculated, including myself, that one upside of this is that the new game releases might be spread out over a greater period of time, and that might be a silver lining on the overcast cloud. But it doesn't appear that that's happening. Instead, the new game releases seem to have largely settled somewhere in the middle of the traditional time of those two conventions, like right now! Of course, this time of year has always seen an uptick of new releases and greater quantities of games are released every year, but things really seem to be at a whole other level right now. We really do seem to be in the middle of a perfect, pleasant storm of delayed Kickstarters fulfilling all at once, Gen Con games needing a little more time and coming out now, and many Essen titles not seeing a reason to wait until Essen. On the one hand, it's a little overwhelming to keep up with, especially when you consider the non-stop irresistible new Kickstarter projects to back. On the other hand, it's been a lot of fun to receive multiple packages and pre-order arrival calls at the same time. When two of the most anticipated games of the entire year, Mariposas and Pendulum, came out on the same day, we're in the middle of a time I think we'll all eventually look back and consider special and amazing. The logjam from earlier in the year has been cleared and the new games are just flowing in, one right after the other. But really, this just means my stack of rulebooks is starting to pile up again. When am I supposed to find the time to read two David Turtsey rulebooks for games, Tekkenu and Roman Roll, that arrived within days of each other, huh? But all things considered, and in the grand scheme of things, it's a nice problem to have in deciding which of these games hits the table ahead of the others. Of course, none of us are going to be able to get all of these new games coming out, and many of us will continue to find it difficult to find people to play these new titles with in the near future. Thank goodness so many of these new titles have solo modes, but in a way those are also nice problems to have. In a year of exterior disappointments, having to choose between a plethora of excellent and exciting games to play is something to relish now and look forward to in the future. This week on the What I've Been Playing segment, I'm going to tell you about Mariposas, designer Elizabeth Hargrave's new butterfly migration themed set collection game from publisher AEG. Wingspan was one of my top games of 2019, so naturally I was very interested in seeing what Elizabeth came out with next. I was a little worried about AEG's presence in the game, as they tend to be a hit-or-miss publisher for me, but ultimately when Spielbound, Omaha's local board game cafe, started taking pre-orders for the game, it was an easy decision to get on board with. I do like butterfly themes a lot, actually. Butterflies strike a spiritual chord with my gender-fluid self. When both Mariposas and Pendulum arrived for sale at the same time and I picked both up on the same day, I went with Mariposas first to punch and organize, read the rulebook right away, and within a week I had it on the table multiple times. Here's how it works. Players each start off with a single Generation 1 butterfly in Michoacan, Mexico. Over the course of 3 seasons, players will flitter their butterflies around the board, pick up flower tokens from flowers they land on, and trade in sets of flower tokens when they land next to a milkweed plant to breed a new generation of butterfly. Movement consists of playing one of 2 movement cards from their hand, which dictates how many butterflies can move that turn and how far each of them go. If players land on a city, they collect a way station card, each of which is worth a point at the end of the game, and if a player collects all 4 in the set, they unlock an immediate or endgame bonus of some kind. After a certain number of movement cards have been played by all the players, the season ends and seasonal objectives are scored. Objectives might include having 1 or more butterflies east, west, north, or south of certain cities on the board, or being landed on certain colored regions of the board. An additional endgame objective will challenge players to return as many Generation 4 butterflies as possible to Michoacan for fabulous amounts of endgame points. The player with the most points wins, naturally, having become the most successful color of butterfly, or something. People are naturally going to want to compare Mariposas to Wingspan because Wingspan was such a special game. But it really doesn't make any sense to, and I'm not actually going to do it myself. But I wound up finding Mariposas very delightful. There's a lot of tactical depth in this elegant package, as players must continually weigh between using their limited move actions for set collection points, in-game points, or invest them towards endgame points, or try to strike some kind of balance between the 3. I really like the pace of the game and how it plays out. Racing toward Michoacan at the end of the game is a great gaming moment as players rejoice in returning their butterflies home and experience agonizing disappointment when several inevitably come up short. There is genuine challenge involved as players try to maximize their point opportunities in this low-scoring game, and so players will experience genuine feelings of accomplishment when they chain together moves over several turns that yield worthwhile benefits for their efforts. I think my only complaint about the game is that Omaha is not represented on the board, despite being a well-known way station for monarch butterflies. But I will overlook this omission for now, since the game does come with pink player pieces, which is a player color all too often neglected in games. Obscure Bryce Game segment time. This week on the segment, I'm going to tell you about Age of Towers, a competitive tower defense game from Heroes of Normandy publisher Devil Pig Games and first-time designer Guillaume Matsuyer. I remember when this launched on Kickstarter a few years ago. I was very tempted to back it then because I tend to enjoy tower defense games, and the competitive nature of this one made it somewhat unique, though it wasn't the first of its kind like the campaign advertised, a distinction that belongs to Castle Assault. But the Kickstarter came at a low funds time for me, and I filed the game away to keep an eye out for on the secondary market later. The game has become quite obscure since its fulfillment, only racking up a handful of log plays a month currently, and I confess I had forgotten about it myself. But when I saw the game on the sales list of a local seller who put the entire all-in backing level up for sale for a great deal at a fraction of the original cost, I had to pull the trigger, got it all organized, and was able to get it to the table soon after for a solo mode game. Here's how it works. Each player's personal play area consists of a path consisting of a certain number of spaces leading to their city that they must defend. A stack of monster tokens exists at the beginning of the path, and each round 2 of these enter the path, and all monster tokens pre-existing on the path advance a certain number of spaces according to their strength. So strong monsters advance faster while weak ones advance slower. If a monster reaches the end of the path and can't advance further, they deal damage equal to their strength to a player's city instead. If a city loses all of its guards, which are essentially hit points, from taking this damage, the city falls and the end of the game is triggered. Following monster advancements, players can spend 2 actions among a menu of actions, Martin Wallace style, to extend the length of the path leading to their city, draw useful quest cards, or erect the titular towers along the path leading to the city. Erected towers can open fire on monsters adjacent to them on the path right after monster advancement and before the action phase. Towers come in 3 colors and can only deal damage to same-colored monsters. A monster token that takes damage is flipped over and may gain different stats and abilities. A damaged monster that takes another damage is killed and removed from the path. Eventually, the boss monster token will enter the path, and then any of the towers can attack it. Boss monster damage is tracked on a boss health track, and the player who managed to kill their boss first can also trigger the end of the game that way. But regardless of how the end of the game is triggered, players will earn points for surviving guards, damage dealt to their boss, and objective trophies. The solo mode is just a beat-your-own high score sort of thing, but with the additional caveat of having to get their city to survive the onslaught and defeat the boss monster. This additional requirement and instant loss risk makes a big difference in the ultimate success I felt the solo mode to be. At first, I found my solo play pretty easy, but things started to escalate toward the end, and I wound up with a narrow victory, which makes me uncertain about how future games will go, something I always appreciate and the sort of thing that brings me back for more. I do wonder if this will be an even more interesting multiplayer game, though, considering the number of opponent manipulation and take-that cards that are in the quest deck. In any event, I'm hoping to try that mode soon. My wife and I have had success with tower defense games in the past, so I think this one will go over well for her. I also appreciate the huge amount of replayability the game's expansions offer up. There are lots of different bosses and combinations of monsters to challenge oneself with, elements I think will make the game continue to be interesting in repeat plays, so I'm glad I was able to acquire an all-in pledge that included these elements. I'm happy this game is in my collection, and its brisk play, tactical decision-making variations, and a wide range of player count options, it goes up to 6 with the expansions, will encourage it to keep returning to my table, I think. This episode, I continue my countdown to both BGGs and my own top 5 of 2010 with the number 1s on the list. Since there are a couple of crossovers on our list, I'm taking a look at the second highest ranked game on BGG from 2010 today, Dominant Species, Chad Jensen's animal-themed worker placement area control game from publisher GMT. 10 years later, this continues to be one of the definitive heavy Euro games out there, while continuing to be lambasted for its abstract components and plain graphic design. I think it's okay to keep those 2 elements in mind, though, because it says something about a game that can look this bad, while still being regarded as one of the definitive standards in its genre. I own this game myself, though I haven't played it in a while, but it remains a distinctive game, and the rare times it makes it to the table are always memorable experiences. It might be a while until I play my own copy again, unfortunately. I borrowed many of the components for a prototype I was working on, and they've been with a publisher for a couple of years now. I regret not wrestling up some other components instead. especially since my son got me the nice upgraded Turned Order Species tokens as a birthday present last year. My own personal number one game of 2010 is Dragonheart, Rudiger Dorn's two-player only tactical card game from publisher Fantasy Flight. God, I love this game, and it's one of the reasons why Rudiger Dorn is one of my top 5 designers. It's easily my favorite two-player only game of all time because I love everything about it. I love how every card plays an agonizing decision of risk-reward analysis. I love the pace of the game and how it has a definite sense of momentum from one player to the other. I love the hand management and how tactics of what to play out over the course of the game. It's a brilliant design and a masterful example of elegance. 10 years later, it's one of my top 5 most played games of all time. It's available on both Yucata and Board Game Arena, and if anyone wants to look me up, I'm Silverberg14 on Yucata and AnLee14 on BGA. It's a game I'm always happy to teach or throw down at. Well, that will do it for episode 74. Thanks for listening. Feel free to join the Out of the Dust Podcast Guild at BoardGameGeek.com. Follow the podcast on Twitter at OutOfTheDustBGG. Leave a comment at the Guild. PM me on BGG under user handle Radagast14 or user handle AnLee14. Or email me at radagast14 at CenturyLink.net. And join the Out of the Dust conversation yourself at our monthly geek list at BGG. Alright, play me out, Ananda!